The story opens in a sleek, high-rise corporate environment, a place where glass walls and polished floors reflect both the ambition and the ruthlessness of those who walk its corridors. The protagonist, an intelligent and observant employee, navigates this world quietly, aware of the subtle hierarchies and politics that govern every interaction. While many are dazzled by titles and flashy confidence, the protagonist knows that true influence often lies in patience, discretion, and an understanding of the personalities at play. The narrative quickly introduces the looming tension, a pivotal board vote that could determine the future of a major company project. And with it, the reputations and fortunes of those involved. At the center of this tension is the CEO's son, a young man who has grown accustomed to privilege and power. His charisma is superficial and his confidence borders on arrogance. He assumes that the board's decisions will always bend to his will, relying on his family name and aggressive self-promotion to manipulate outcomes. Early scenes demonstrate his dismissive attitude toward others, particularly those he considers beneath him, including the protagonist. He interrupts meetings, overshadows ideas not his own, and casually undermines colleagues to maintain an illusion of omnipotence. Yet despite his outward bravado, there is a subtle insecurity in him, a reliance on others' approval, and the assumption that influence equals invincibility. Amid this landscape emerges a key figure, a female board member with the rare and often underestimated power of a veto. She is depicted as poised, discerning, and quietly formidable. Unlike the CEO's son, she does not flaunt her authority or seek attention. Her strength lies in observation, judgment, and an unwavering commitment to fairness and competence. Where others attempt to charm or manipulate her, she remains impervious, and the mere mention of her veto power sends ripples through the boardroom. Her presence immediately establishes a sense of uncertainty, hinting that the seemingly predictable dynamics of the company can shift at any moment. If she chooses to act, the protagonist notices her carefully, recognizing both her influence and her values. Unlike the CEO's son, whose actions are transparent and self-serving, she operates with subtlety. The protagonist begins to assess the situation strategically, observing not only the personalities and ambitions of colleagues, but also the underlying power structures that can be leveraged. The story emphasizes the contrast between superficial power embodied by the CEO's son and true influence, which comes from understanding people, timing, and leverage. As the narrative progresses in Part 1, tension builds through small yet telling interactions. The CEO's son makes overconfident assumptions about the board's loyalty, casually dismissing opposing ideas while projecting dominance. The protagonist, meanwhile, quietly documents his missteps, noting patterns in behavior, moments of overreach, and the subtle ways in which others defer to or resent him. These observations set the stage for the story's central conflict, foreshadowing how strategy, insight, and patience can be used to challenge someone who seems untouchable. Part 1 closes by establishing the central stakes. The protagonist must navigate a complex web of ambition, entitlement, and authority to find leverage where others see none. The power dynamics are clear. The CEO's son wields inherited authority and boldness. The board member holds the rare and decisive veto, and the protagonist occupies a position of knowledge and patience. This setup promises a story of strategic maneuvering, where intelligence, observation, and subtle action will ultimately confront arrogance and entitlement. By the end of this part, readers understand that the seemingly underappreciated protagonist may, in fact, be the most formidable player in the room. The small betrayals deepens the tension established in Part 1, showing how the CEO's son's arrogance begins to manifest in subtle but damaging ways while the protagonist quietly prepares for strategic action. The narrative shifts to highlight the personal and professional dynamics that make the boardroom not just a place of decision-making but a battlefield of ego, ambition, and manipulation. The CEO's son, secure in his belief that his family name and flashy confidence guarantee success, starts to assert his influence more aggressively. At meetings, he interrupts colleagues, takes credit for ideas that were not his, and belittles suggestions that do not align with his vision. These small betrayals are not overtly malicious but are carefully calculated to assert dominance and remind everyone of his assumed superiority. For the protagonist, these actions are simultaneously irritating and enlightening. They provide clear insight into his patterns of arrogance and expose the weaknesses that can later be leveraged. Meanwhile, the protagonist's role in this corporate chess game becomes more active. Rather than reacting with confrontation, which would only provoke retaliation or further marginalization, they choose observation and analysis. Each slight, each dismissal is logged mentally like pieces on a chessboard. The protagonist watches which colleagues are swayed by the CEO's son, which ones are resistant and who might quietly resent his entitlement. They begin mapping relationships, noting alliances, weaknesses, and potential leverage points. This stage highlights the contrast between visible, loud power and quiet, strategic influence. At the same time, the board member who holds the veto emerges more prominently as a figure of potential leverage. She is calm, composed, and discerning, noticing both the subtleties of the CEO's son's maneuvers and the protagonist's careful observation. While other board members may be swayed by charm or intimidation, she remains unimpressed, acting as a gatekeeper whose values center on fairness, competence, and long-term vision. The protagonist realizes that understanding her motivations and earning her trust, or at least her respect, could be the key to turning the upcoming vote in a favorable direction. Tension escalates through small, everyday betrayals that appear minor but carry cumulative impact. Perhaps the CEO's son takes credit for a project the protagonist worked tirelessly on, or casually ignores their recommendations in front of the team. Each incident chips away at morale and creates a quiet sense of injustice, but it also reinforces the protagonist's resolve. These betrayals illustrate a critical theme. Power is not only in titles or authority, but also in perception, strategy, and the ability to act at the right moment. Through Part 2, the story emphasizes the contrast between hubris and patience. The CEO's son operates with reckless overconfidence, failing to notice that the protagonist is quietly cataloging his missteps, understanding the board's personalities, and preparing to leverage unseen power structures. Readers see that the protagonist's strength lies not in confrontation but in foresight, careful planning, and subtle influence. This makes the eventual use of the board member's veto feel earned and inevitable rather than convenient. By the end of Part 2, the stage is set for the upcoming conflict. The CEO's son has established himself as overconfident and dismissive, while the protagonist has positioned themselves as a patient observer and strategist. The board member's presence looms larger, her veto power now clearly the pivotal element in the story. The protagonist recognizes that the next phase requires not only clever manipulation of events, but also a deep understanding of human behavior, timing, and leverage. Part 2 closes with a growing sense of anticipation. The boardroom, filled with subtle tension and unspoken rivalries, is primed for the dramatic clash that will define the story. The strategic observation marks a turning point in the story, where the protagonist shifts from quiet observation to active strategic planning. While Part 2 focused on the small betrayals and the protagonist's careful assessment of personalities, Part 3 emphasizes the mental and tactical groundwork that will eventually allow them to leverage the board member's veto against the CEO's son. It's a period of preparation, insight, and subtle manipulation, highlighting the protagonist's intelligence and patience as their greatest weapons. The protagonist begins to analyze the CEO's son with a heightened intensity, seeking patterns in his behavior and weaknesses in his approach. They note how he reacts when challenged, who he fears or underestimates, and what motivates his decisions. The son's arrogance remains his most glaring flaw. He assumes influence comes solely from his family name and bold gestures, leaving him blind to subtle threats and quiet strategists like the protagonist. Small incidents that seemed inconsequential earlier now serve as critical data points, revealing vulnerabilities in his overconfidence, his reliance on allies, and his inability to anticipate moves that do not fit his expected narrative. At the same time, the protagonist turns their attention to the board member with veto power. They observe her values, her decision-making style, and the subtle cues she gives when she approves or disapproves of proposals. Unlike others, she does not respond to charm or intimidation. Her decisions are guided by competence, fairness, and the long-term benefit of the company rather than personal gain or loyalty to the CEO's son. The protagonist realizes that her veto is the ultimate leverage point, but only if used with understanding, tact, and alignment with her principles. This insight is crucial. Influence cannot be forced. It must be earned through careful alignment with her priorities. The narrative in this part also explores the protagonist's quiet alliances. They begin forming discreet relationships with colleagues who share their frustrations or recognize the CEO's son's flaws. These alliances are not overt or confrontational. Rather, they function as subtle reinforcement, gathering information, corroborating observations, and occasionally sowing doubt about the son's infallibility. Each interaction serves as reconnaissance, gradually assembling a picture of the corporate battlefield that allows the protagonist to anticipate moves and prepare countermoves. Meanwhile, tension continues to rise in the boardroom. The CEO's son becomes increasingly bold, making flashy proposals and public claims of inevitable success. Yet the protagonist notices cracks in his demeanor, fleeting impatience, overreactions when challenged, and the subtle unease that comes when he senses an undercurrent he cannot control. These observations build suspense, demonstrating that the protagonist is not only prepared, but also growing in confidence. Understanding the psychological leverage points that will be essential in the climax. The strategic observation phase also highlights the intellectual duel between the protagonist and the CEO's son. While he relies on noise, aggression, and entitlement, the protagonist cultivates silence, patience, and meticulous planning. This contrast reinforces one of the story's central themes. True power is often invisible, built on foresight and understanding, not just titles or brashness. Readers begin to anticipate that the eventual confrontation will favor the one who can think several moves. Ahead, a classic scenario where careful preparation outmaneuvers arrogance. By the end of Part 3, the foundation is firmly set for the climax. The protagonist knows how the CEO's son will likely act, understands the board members' values and potential reactions, and has aligned subtle support from key colleagues. The boardroom has become a carefully observed stage where each gesture, remark, and proposal can influence the outcome. The story now teeters on the edge of strategic action, with the protagonist poised to transform observation into a calculated maneuver that will ultimately humble the overconfident CEO's son and demonstrate the true power of insight and patience. The Veto maneuver is the story's dramatic climax, where all the careful observation, strategic planning, and patience of the protagonist come to fruition. The tension that has been steadily building through parts 1 to 3 now reaches its peak, with the boardroom poised as a high-stakes battlefield. Every glance, gesture, and word has meaning, and the CEO's son, overconfident and unaware of the forces aligned against him, is about to face a humbling defeat. The story opens on the day of the critical board meeting. The CEO's son enters with his usual swagger, assuming the vote will follow his direction. His confidence is almost palpable. He dismisses subtle cues from colleagues, makes casual remarks about the inevitability of his proposal, and expects that charm, entitlement, and assertiveness will secure his victory. To the onlookers, he appears untouchable, a young man whose family legacy has shielded him from accountability. Yet the protagonist, armed with insight from months of observation and quiet alliances, is ready to exploit the one element the CEO's son has overlooked: the board member's decisive veto. The tension in the boardroom is heightened through careful narration of subtle interactions. The protagonist notices fleeting expressions, shifts in body language, and small hesitations that hint at uncertainty among the board members. Each moment of doubt strengthens the protagonist's confidence, reinforcing the idea that control in corporate politics is as much about reading people as it is about wielding authority. The narrative emphasizes the contrast between the CEO's son's outward boldness and the protagonist's quiet mastery of timing and influence. The pivotal moment arrives when the CEO's son presents his proposal. A grand and self-serving plan designed to impress and assert dominance. He frames it as both innovative and inevitable, assuming that his peers will be dazzled by his audacity. The protagonist, however, knows that the board members' priorities fairness, competence, and long-term company success are misaligned with the self-interest driving his plan. With careful subtlety, the protagonist engages her, presenting points that highlight the risks, flaws, and ethical concerns of the proposal without directly challenging the CEO's son. This is the masterstroke. Instead of confrontation, the protagonist aligns the veto holder's perspective with the company's best interest, allowing her authority to act as the instrument of justice. When the board member exercises her veto, it is not a personal attack but a firm, principled decision. The room freezes as the weight of her authority falls upon the CEO's son. His shock is immediate. His confidence falters as he realizes he misjudged both the board member and the protagonist. Colleagues exchange glances, whispers ripple through the room, and the veneer of invincibility begins to crack. The veto exposes his arrogance, his over-reliance on entitlement, and the lack of substance behind his bold gestures. What had seemed inevitable to him now collapses in public view. A masterful reversal orchestrated not through direct conflict but through insight, timing, and strategic leverage. The narrative emphasizes the satisfaction of justice served subtly without excess cruelty. The CEO's son is humbled, forced to reckon with the limits of privilege and the consequences of underestimating others. Meanwhile, the protagonist's role remains understated but undeniable. They have orchestrated the outcome through intelligence, foresight, and patience, demonstrating that true influence often resides in quiet, calculated actions rather than loud, flashy displays of power. By the end of Part 4, the boardroom has been transformed into a stage of revelation. The protagonist has successfully navigated complex dynamics, using the veto not for personal vendetta but to expose hubris and reaffirm principles of competence and fairness. The climax resonates with tension, psychological insight, and strategic brilliance, delivering the story's most dramatic payoff while setting the stage for the fallout, recognition, and resolution in the following parts. The consequences explores the aftermath of the veto and the ripple effects it has across the company. The CEO's son and the protagonist. While Part 4 delivered the story's climactic confrontation, Part 5 shifts the focus to the fallout, emphasizing how power, humility, and perception intersect in the corporate world. This section balances tension with reflection, showing that actions have consequences and that strategic victories can reshape relationships and reputations. The immediate impact of the veto is palpable. The CEO's son, who had entered the boardroom brimming with confidence, now faces a moment of public embarrassment. His proposal, which he had framed as bold and inevitable, has been halted, and the authority of the board member has been revealed in stark relief. Colleagues who once deferred to him or flattered his ambitions now exchange glances tinged with surprise or vindication. The protagonist observes the subtle shifts in dynamics, recognizing that the son's credibility has taken a serious blow not because of personal attacks, but because of his own hubris and the careful orchestration of influence around him. The CEO's son experiences a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and shame. He struggles to regain composure, attempting to justify his actions while masking the cracks in his confidence. His arrogance had blinded him to the board member's priorities and to the quiet strategist who had guided the veto. This moment serves as a turning point for him. He is forced to confront the limits of privilege and authority, realizing that boldness alone cannot secure respect or compliance. The narrative highlights his internal reckoning, offering readers insight into the psychological toll of overconfidence and public defeat. Meanwhile, the protagonist receives subtle but significant recognition. Their role in influencing the board member's decision is not broadcasted. Loudly, there is no overt celebration, but those attuned to corporate dynamics understand the depth of the strategic achievement. Allies who had quietly supported the protagonist now look to them with respect, while even previously indifferent colleagues begin to take notice of their insight and poise. The story underscores a recurring theme. True power is often invisible, earned through patience, intelligence, and careful observation rather than showmanship or entitlement. The board member, whose veto was pivotal, maintains her composure, reinforcing the principle that decisions grounded in fairness and competence carry the most weight. She serves as a quiet but moralizing force in the story, validating the protagonist's approach and emphasizing the importance of aligning influence with principle. Her decision sends a broader message to the company. Authority is meaningful only when exercised judiciously, and arrogance or overconfidence can be exposed when confronted with integrity and strategic thinking. Additionally, Part 5 explores the subtle shifts in alliances and office politics following the veto. Colleagues begin to reassess their loyalties, recognizing that the CEO's son is no longer infallible. Some seek to distance themselves from him, while others quietly gravitate toward the protagonist, whose reputation for insight and discretion is now firmly established. This sets the stage for long-term change in the company's culture and leadership dynamics, showing that a single strategic maneuver can have consequences far beyond the immediate boardroom. By the end of Part 5, the story emphasizes balance between justice and subtlety. The CEO's son has been humbled. The protagonist has emerged as a quiet yet formidable presence, and the board member's authority has been reaffirmed. The fallout is both professional and personal. Reputations are recalibrated, power structures are adjusted, and the narrative tension begins to shift from immediate conflict toward resolution and reflection. The protagonist's quiet triumph demonstrates that strategic patience, observation, and leverage can ultimately reshape outcomes in a world dominated by appearance and entitlement. The personal victory serves as the story's resolution, showing how the protagonist's careful strategy, patience, and intelligence culminate not only in professional success but also in personal satisfaction and insight. While the climax and consequences have already demonstrated the CEO's son's public humiliation and the protagonist's quiet influence, this final section emphasizes reflection, growth, and the subtle rewards of foresight and principled action. The immediate aftermath of the veto has settled, and the company is beginning to adjust to the new reality. The CEO's son, once brimming with arrogance and entitlement, is noticeably humbled. He no longer carries the same unshakable confidence. Meetings that once showcased his bravado are now more cautious, measured, and tinged with self-doubt. While he retains his title and privileges, the incident has left an indelible mark on his reputation. Colleagues are less willing to defer automatically to his ideas, and his influence is now balanced by recognition of his misjudgments. This shift underscores one of the story's central themes. True authority comes from competence, judgment, and integrity, not inheritance or superficial confidence. The protagonist, in contrast, experiences a quieter but deeply meaningful victory. Their strategic patience and observational skills have not only averted the CEO's son's overreach but also earned them respect from colleagues and the board. While no one overtly announces their triumph, subtle acknowledgments, nodding respect, private congratulations, and renewed trust from key decision-makers confirm the protagonist's growing stature. Their success is measured not by public acclaim but by influence, credibility, and the ability to shape outcomes through insight rather than force. This reinforces the story's recurring motif. Quiet intelligence often wields more lasting power than bold arrogance. The board member who exercised the veto remains a guiding presence, her authority and discernment validated by the outcome. The protagonist reflects on their interactions with her, recognizing the importance of aligning strategy with principle. Her decision demonstrates that influence is most effective when it operates in harmony with fairness and competence, and the protagonist internalizes this lesson as they contemplate their future in the company. The subtle mentorship, whether acknowledged or not, becomes a cornerstone of the protagonist's personal and professional growth. The narrative also explores the broader transformation within the company. Colleagues who had once been intimidated or manipulated by the CEO's son now observe the balance of power differently. The protagonist's influence fosters a culture of respect, competence, and strategic thinking, This shift is not overtly dramatic but is felt in small, meaningful ways. Proposals are evaluated more critically, ideas are given due consideration, and arrogance is tempered by the knowledge that overconfidence can be countered with intelligence and foresight. The protagonist's victory, therefore, is both personal and systemic. On a personal level, the protagonist experiences a quiet sense of fulfillment. Unlike a story driven by vengeance or spectacle, their satisfaction comes from knowing that justice, competence, and strategic thinking have prevailed. They have demonstrated that even in environments dominated by entitlement and superficial power, careful observation, patience, and principled action can achieve lasting results. This moment of reflection allows the protagonist to appreciate not only their victory over the CEO's son, but also the deeper understanding of human behavior, corporate dynamics, and the subtle art of influence. By the story's end, the arc is complete. The CEO's son has been humbled. The protagonist has emerged as a capable and respected force, and the board member's decisive role underscores the value of principle-driven authority. The resolution is satisfying because it balances public consequences with personal growth, demonstrating that true victory lies not in overt domination but in quiet mastery, strategic foresight, and the ability to turn observation into action. The protagonist's journey concludes with both triumph and reflection, leaving the audience with a sense of justice, intelligence, and the enduring power of subtle influence.